Let's talk about coronavirus planning reforms, quite a few things I'm keen to get through with you. But first, you've got an announcement this morning on weddings. You're making it a lot easier to marry outside. My question is to you, I suppose, why don't you just allow people to get married anywhere they want outside rather than just the confines of approved premises, which you're still restricting to, like a hilltop of their choice or a beach, maybe?
Well, look, that sounds great, but I do think it's important that we remember that without going into the depths of it, marriage law was developed over the centuries for good reasons. A wedding is not just a big day emotionally and a wonderful day. It's also quite a solemn day in the sense that people are making a solemn vows to each other, and that can be civil partnership, civil marriage as well. And therefore, I think making sure that the setting is appropriate is right, which is why we've got the approved premises system. But within that, there's going to be a lot of room now for imaginative solutions to quite tricky problems that I think COVID's thrown up. And what I wanted to do was to ensure that as many couples as possible could have their most important day in as free and as full a setting as possible. And that's why being able to have civil marriages outdoors will allow venues to adapt even further, to allow for more friends and loved ones to be present in a safe way, and to just give everybody the flexibility that I think we need this summer in order to get weddings, back to where we want to see them. And I'm thinking as well about the wedding industry and the pain and suffering that they've gone through. I wanted to do this to really try and help them through what's been the most difficult period.
Let me ask you another question about weddings. The story broke here on Times Radio last week. Sajid Javid's attempt to raise the age when you can get married from 16 to 18 legally to stop sexual abuse through forced marriages, which is a big concern of his. Now, he's bringing that through a private member's bill. I know he's been talking to you about it. Does he have your support to do this, and will he get government time for this bill?
Well, I really welcome Sajid's introduction of a hugely important measure. It's no secret that the principle of the need to protect children and young people is very much at the core of my thinking, which is why I do believe that the age of marriage should be raised. There are too many examples, I'm afraid, of the mechanism of parental consent, which of course was originally designed to protect young people from making perhaps ill-advised choices, being frankly misused to commoditize marriage and to propagate what I think is child abuse. And Saj is right to talk about that in the frank way that he does. We're obviously looking at the detail very carefully. His bill, I don't think, is yet to be debated. Certainly by the time that comes up, we will be in a position to nail on the approach the government is taking. But it's no secret that the principle of what he's trying to do is strongly supported by government, and I'm sure we'll work together to achieve much needed reform.
So, one form or another, it does very much sound like it. You will only be able to get married legally once you turn 18 quite soon.
Well, that's certainly what I believe. It puts us in line with other countries as well. We are world leaders in child protection, Tom. Our legislation is amongst the best in the world. I think going this stage further will again reinforce the work that we have done in England and Wales to protect children and young people, and that's got to be a good thing.
Let's move on to coronavirus. Delta variant cases and hospitalisation numbers are still going up, as you know. But the PM said on Friday that he's still treating the 19th of July as a terminus date and is confident that those remaining restrictions will be lifted by then. I think that's certainly what the data continues to indicate, said the Prime Minister. Problem is, he said that about June the 21st.
Yeah, but rightly so. All of us applied the tests that we'd agreed as part of the roadmap. We'd said that June the 21st was at the earliest. And whilst the growing evidence about the effectiveness of the vaccine in reducing transmission is very clear and getting better and better, there are two other issues. There was the rise of the variant of concern, the Delta variant, which did have a big effect on the way that we were calculating things. And then secondly, the danger of that rapid doubling of hospitalizations, the rate at which suddenly we were seeing, a rise. And I think for those cogent and clear reasons, based upon the evidence, we took the the right decision in the circumstances. We've got that 2-week checkpoint as well. But the PM is right to say, look, the evidence continues to emerge well. The jab drive continues. I mean, it's wonderful to see all those young people queuing to get their jab yesterday. That's precisely what we need to keep driving forward in order to get as many people double jabbed as possible by the 19th of July. And that will give us a really sound basis for progress.
I understand that. It's, I suppose, trying to understand whether we should believe the PM this time rather than the last time. And of course, his word didn't actually come right. But let me just ask you about that. To go to step 4 on July the 19th, do you need cases numbers and hospitalisation numbers, crucially, to flatten or start declining even, to open up to go to step 4, or will you move to step 4 anyway?
Look, I think the key is that we need to make sure that we're not in a position where the new variant of concern, which has been, the thing that has happened to change our calculations, doesn't then risk a surge in hospitalizations in the way that can often lead, as we know, to long periods of hospitalization, or even worse, or even death. And that's why I think focusing upon the test that we set out back in February, March is the way to go. I'm not going to precisely predict what the world is going to look like close to the 19th of July. It's still 3-4 weeks away, but I do think that remembering what the PM said about the 21st of June being at the earliest actually is understood by people, and that's why there's been very significant and clear support for the measured decision that we took to make sure that this roadmap is cautious but irreversible.
No, that I understand. My point to you was hospitalizations are going up. What do you do if they're still going up on July the 19th? Now, Jeremy Brown, who's a professor of respiratory infection at University College London Hospitals and a member of the JCVI, told Times Radio last week that he's particularly concerned about the different rate of cases, the different vaccination rollout speeds across the country, because there are huge regional variations. London is behind, well behind, as we know. And he worried that there could be an element that could see London in real trouble come July the 19th, with big surges in hospitalizations. What do you then do if one part of the country, like London, is in real trouble with hospitals full and in real trouble of having to turn people away, but other parts of the country are free? You'll have to delay again, will you?
Well, look, Tom, I think it's right for you and only proper for you to pose various scenarios to me. I think the reality is that not only have we got the vaccine, we've got the surge testing facility as well to try and understand what's happening in local areas. I think that we all know what a surge in hospitalizations would look like. I mean, it's in essence, it's suddenly you see a doubling of hospital rates over a shorter period of time. 21 days is one thing, but suddenly a doubling in, say, 3 or 4 days is quite a dramatic change. And you and I could sort of posit all sorts of scenarios here in discussion today. I don't think that's actually fruitful. What I can assure listeners is that, of course, we rigorously look at the evidence every day. And that's why we make decisions. Some people would say, they're quite last-minute decisions, but that's right, because we need to have the most up-to-date information before we finally, press a button or say hold. And that's what we did last week, and that's what we'll do again as we approach the 19th of July.
Okay. Public Health England's Dr. Susan Hopkins has said this morning elsewhere on another broadcast outlet that we may need lockdowns this winter if things go badly. Is that right?
Well, look, again, I mean, I heard something of what Professor Hopkins says. I think all of us are, mature enough and grown up enough who've lived through this crisis to know that you can't ever sort of say, we're mission accomplished. It isn't like that. The virus is going to be with us. The question is the efficacy of the vaccine, the need for boosters, which I think everybody is well understands that, and the way then that we manage it through the winter. Now, look, I think that the vaccination campaign, not only has it been successful, but it's proved and shown with emerging evidence that you can break that chain between transmission and then hospitalisation. You can do it, and if, as I'm confident and hopeful, that evidence gets stronger and stronger, then the case for the sort of lockdown approach becomes weaker and weaker.
All right, but I don't think you're ruling out a lockdown in the winter if it needs to happen, are you?
Look, I don't want one. I don't think anybody wants lockdowns. I think we've just got to relentlessly push on, keep breaking that link to make the need for a lockdown much less than it's ever been in the past.
Okay. Can we expect an update to the travel list tomorrow? 7 days out before the promised date. You promised to give airlines 7 days notice. I don't think we're expecting many changes. What are you hoping for?
Well, look, my colleagues in the Department for Transport are, of course, responsible for that rather than me, Tom. But you know that regularly they are looking at the data, they're scrubbing it, they're examining it, they're finding out ways in which it can then translate into, changes. I think all of us, we want, that list to get longer, but we have to exercise the sort of caution the British people would expect, bearing in mind how close we are now coming to the end of that roadmap. And
So
therefore,
no update tomorrow.
Well, I'm not going to predict precisely what's going to happen tomorrow. What I do know is that Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, has been, more than keen to regularly update the public and to calibrate and change where necessary.
Let's talk about the Cheshire and Amersham by-election defeat last Thursday. It was a hammer blow to the party. The party, in various forms, has admitted that. Two big issues seem to have dominated that campaign: opposition to HS2 and opposition to your planning reform. So, was it a victory for NIMBYism?
Well, look, I went out on the stump in Cheshire and Amersham, and people's concerns were real. I mean, HS2 is now happening, and therefore that does affect people's lives, and that clearly shone through from the conversations I had on the doorstep. There was a wider campaign going on, mainly generated through some very interesting Lib Dem leaflets that perhaps weren't quite a reflection of the policy, which is not to build over the green belt or to build over areas of outstanding natural beauty like we have in the Chilterns, but to provide the homes that our children and grandchildren need. If we're going to solve the housing supply crisis in this country, you've got to build homes, which is why in the last year we built over 250,000, the biggest number since 1987, but we've got further to do. And it's not just about piling high, certainly not about piling high in the south and to hell with the hindmost. It's about spreading that home ownership and home development across our country. And this issue is just as important in the north, in the west, in the east, as it is in the south.
Just on those planning reforms, though, I mean, the Prime Minister called it a misunderstanding what was going on in Cheshire and Amersham about your reforms. One Tory MP said yesterday, and I quote, "No one understands why we're doing this." Do you accept that perhaps you haven't done a good enough job yet to explain what those planning reforms are all about?
Look, I think all of us, as politicians and as ministers, like to have the chance, as I am this morning, to explain things. But COVID has tended to dominate quite naturally. We published the planning white paper some months ago. We said that we would come forward with legislative proposals, and that is going to happen. I think, frankly, talking in more detail about it is great. I just want to assure listeners that what we're trying to do here is get the right balance, trying to end the old sort of battle that we always seem to have about planning applications. It always seems to me, certainly from my considerable experience of having gone through many of them as a local MP, that the public already feel shut out of it and feel disenfranchised. So the current system is not working. We can do better, I think, with the proposals that we've set forward to involve the public right at the get-go, so that they feel consulted and part of the process even before particular planning applications come onto the horizon. That's what we should be doing, and that's what these proposals embody.
Right, except no one seems to understand them or believe them. So I think you accept there's a better job to be done in selling them.
Well, we're going to keep relentlessly doing that. And I know Rob Jenrick and Chris Pincher, the Housing Minister, are working very hard with colleagues and indeed more widely to talk about the opportunity that these reforms give us to deliver the homes that Britain needs.
Let's move on to a couple of other quick issues. Dominic Cummings described Boris Johnson this week as a gaffe machine, clueless about policy and government. He was the Prime Minister's de facto former Chief of Staff, after all, so you think he might know. What do you think about when you heard that?
Well, frankly, I think it's a complete mischaracterization of the Prime Minister that I work with and know. He is an extraordinary politician who has this ability to connect with the public. He also, in the detail, absolutely understands the issue is over them. Certainly when I'm dealing with him on criminal justice matters, he gets the point, and he is decisive and works collaboratively with cabinet colleagues. That's not the characterisation I recognise about him at all And I don't want to comment about the person making them, but really we need to move on from this sort of cheap jibe type of politics.
Well, it's him making the cheap jives. We're just reporting them, of course. Now, you
Yeah.
were one of 4 cabinet ministers, quite noticeably at the time, not to stand up in defence of Dominic Cummings when he had his famous Barnard Castle episode last May. Your silence was notable and reported on at the time. Do you think your actions then are now justifiable what Cummings has gone and done to your Prime Minister?
Yes.
Expand a little bit, please.
I don't think I need to. Yes, I think that government is operating very well. Well, look at what happened in the opinion polls. You know, we rose considerably in the opinion polls in that time post November. We had excellent local government results and creditable results across our country. I think the Prime Minister is doing very well. Thank you very much. He's got a great team around him, and we're getting on with delivering the people's priorities and levelling up this country.
You went up in the polls because Dominic Cummings left.
Look, I'm just making an observation about the circumstances. I'm not here to make ad hominem comments. I mean, what happened at Barnard Castle, I think I've said in the past, was deeply unfortunate. But look, I think that the idea that somehow one person can sort of epitomise or dominate a government is for the birds. That's not how it works. And in fact, if you look at the evidence and the experience that he had, that clearly shone out. That wasn't, going to be possible, and thank goodness for that. Government is a collective series of decision making, and that's how it should be done. Cabinet has to be at the heart of decision making in government, and after that collective debate within government, then a common view is advanced, and it should be held to. And advisors are not elected. They are there to advise. It's ministers who decide, and it's elected representatives like me, like the PM, who lead.
Sonia wants to ask you a couple of quick questions. I've got one more for you first, though. Talking about collective decision making, you're working with Brandon Lewis on a solution to end vexatious prosecutions in Northern Ireland for veterans, Northern Ireland veterans, aren't you? We haven't heard very much about that of late at all. Still a huge issue. Johnny Mercer, the Veterans Minister, resigned over it. Are you still planning to introduce an effective statute of limitations for troubles prosecutions for both UK service personnel and Irish Republicans who potentially committed crimes during that period? Because that's the idea on the table now.
Well, Tom, look, you're right to press us on this. I can assure you that Brandon Lewis is working extremely hard on the issues, the serious issues that cause real concern to people who are doing their job at a time of great stress and difficulty and at the time of the Troubles. And we want to achieve a solution that will work in law and which will deliver that sort of closure, not just for the dedicated armed forces themselves, but actually for the wider community in Northern Ireland. Now, Brandon is, as you can see, working night and day on a range of issues in Northern Ireland, most notably at the moment with regard to the politics of the situation. But I know he's also focused very much on achieving the sort of solution that I think will benefit everybody, and we'll continue to make that our priority for this session ahead.
Hello, Mr. Buckland. The Observer's reported today that a third of convicted sex offenders have avoided prison in the last 7 years, including hundreds of men convicted of sex offences with children. How's this been allowed to happen?
Well, thank you, Sonia. And I think, whilst I haven't read the article, I think it's important for me to point out, first of all, of course, that individual decisions on sentencing are a matter for independent judges. There are guidelines that judges use in these cases. And I think the encouraging point to make is that over the last several years, since those guidelines were introduced, sentences for sex offending have been rising in terms of the length of incarceration. So take rape, for example. Rape sentences on average are now much closer to 10 years than they've ever been before. I will take a very close look at that piece and indeed the data behind it. But can I assure the public in everything that I've been doing, I've been increasing public protection. So, for example, increasing the length of time that serious sexual offenders have to serve in prison before release. That's all about public protection. I want to maximise that. and indeed in the bill that I've got before Parliament, we're taking some important measures again to strengthen that sort of approach. But there's also rehabilitation, which is vitally important. But I will take a careful look at that article in the data.
Yeah, this isn't about length of sentences. This is about people who don't actually get prison sentences in the first place. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, another big problem with sexual offences is the plummeting prosecution rates for rape in this country, which you've acknowledged. Rory Stewart, back in 2018, when he was Justice Secretary, said he'd resign if he failed to reduce drug taking and violence in prisons in the course of a year. Are you going to make a similar commitment to women around rape convictions?
Well, first of all, Rory, as a Minister for Prisons just before me, made a pledge relating to matters that were entirely within his purview. As a minister, he was responsible, like I was and am, responsible for the administration and operation of the prisons. It would be wholly wrong of me to make some sort of political commitment, as is being suggested by the opposition, on the basis of independent decisions made by the police and prosecutors. Can you imagine if Keir Starmer was still Director of Public Prosecutions, and he had a phone call from me saying, "Do you know what, Sir Keir, I really need you to ramp up prosecutions here because my political future's at stake." That would be wholly improper. It would be constitutionally wrong. It would be an undue influence on the prosecutorial process. I want to see safe convictions here, and I want to see more of them. Frankly, that sort of approach that is being suggested by the Labour Party should be beneath them, and it's beneath the issue. Frankly, we need to raise the level of debate here in the way that I hope I'm trying to do by acknowledging the failure and then pledging through the action plan to do better.